Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're about to begin a brand new love journey. Please comment on where you're watching from so we can see that our Soul Stories family is all around the world. Florence, the city of light, of art, of symphonies trembling softly in the night wind, and the bells of Santa Maria del Fiore. A place where everything seems to possess its own beauty except for the silence blanketing the penthouse on the 27th floor of the Palazzo Vecchio residences. In that stillness, Isabella Moretti sat alone. A glass of red wine rested quietly in her hand, the golden glow of the crystal chandelier glinting against the silk of her dress, as soft as skin, as fragile as the emotions slowly draining from her heart. 3 years ago, she had believed that marrying Leonardo Devereux was a gift from destiny. He, the man with eyes like molten steel, cold and alluring all at once, the French CEO admired across the European architecture world. He had swept into her life like a luxurious storm, promises, roses, midnight flights from Paris, just to kiss her goodbye before heading back into a morning meeting. But now the apartment, once full of perfume and laughter, held only the tick of a clock and the faint sound of her breathing. Isabella tilted her glass slightly, listening to the wine brush against the crystal. A small sound, yet in this empty room, it rang like a sad note. Outside, the city still blazed with light red-tiled rooftops, cobblestone streets, crowds buzzing in Piazza della Repubblica. Florence was heartbreakingly beautiful, yet she felt trapped inside it like a perfect painting hung on the wrong wall. Leonardo! Her voice was as light as breath, dissolving into the air. No answer. Only the wind rattles against the glass panes. He had once promised she would never feel alone, and he had kept that promise in the cruelest way. Present in the house, but absent from everything else. She rose and walked to the window. The glass was cool beneath her skin as she pressed her forehead to it. Far off, the Ponte Vecchio reflected golden light onto the Arno, a shimmering ribbon of memories drifting out of reach. She remembered their first time here together, when he had chuckled as she teased, "If you're going to conquer the whole world, you should at least conquer dinner with me." Back then, he still knew how to laugh. Back then, they still touched without needing a reason. Now, 3 years later, she had everything and she had lost everything. Gala nights, holidays on the Côte d'Azur, flawless spreads in Maison Elegance. But the one thing she no longer had was his gaze. She turned, the light casting exhaustion across her face. In the mirror, a 29-year-old woman stared back, brown eyes that once made strangers stop in the street, now dulled with a faint sadness. Her long black hair tied neatly back, bare shoulders carrying a hint of lavender, the scent he once said smelled like summer in Provence. Isabella smiled faintly. He didn't remember that scent anymore. She whispered as if afraid to hear herself, "We live together, but we no longer touch." The words fell into the air, warm as a confession. Yes, she still loved him, even though every day she told herself she didn't. Even though every time he passed through the living room, with his phone pressed to his ear, his shirt impeccable, and his eyes sliding over her as if she were a piece of furniture. In that moment, she realized she had become one of the things he designed: beautiful, balanced, but without a soul. She went to the small desk by the window, where a half-finished sketch still lay, a design for a private client in Milan. She touched the pencil lightly, a wan smile flickering on her lips. Once he had said, "I love your hands because they can turn feelings into shapes." Now he only loved the contracts. The soft hiss of the electronic door sounded in the hall, the sign he had returned. Isabella's heart beat faster. 3 years, and still she reacted like the 26-year-old girl she had been, her stomach fluttering at the sound of his footsteps. Then she heard his voice on the phone. "Oui, Pierre, I've reviewed the design." "No, don't change the light perimeter. See you tomorrow morning." His voice cold, decisive, full of authority. No greeting, no glance. She quietly returned to the sofa and lifted her glass again. This time the wine tasted bitter, perhaps because it mixed with the thin thread of tears at the corner of her eye. Leonardo passed by, placing a file on the table, then paused. "You're still up?" His tone had the politeness of a business inquiry, as if speaking to a secretary. "No, I'm waiting for you." He nodded slightly, answering only, I have some things to handle. The office door closed. A small sound, but it felt like the final period of the evening. Isabella sat still. On the wall, the antique clock struck 9. Everything was perfect: the light, the sound, the taste of the wine, the space, except for one thing. Her heart had been silent for too long. Outside, the church bells rang 10 times. In the darkness, she whispered like a curse carried by the wind. If you can no longer see me, then I will make all of Florence see. The words were not a challenge, but an awakening. That night, in the city of art and memory, something inside Isabella Moretti stirred awake the part that had once burned, once dreamed, once believed she deserved to be loved, not displayed. Florence was more radiant than usual that afternoon. The sun spilled through the olive branches, casting a soft golden light over the red rooftops of the ancient city. Inside the penthouse overlooking the Arno River, the faint scent of amber perfume mingled with slow piano music, drifting from a small speaker, the sound Isabella played, only to fill the silence within her heart. On the white marble table lay an invitation to the Devereux Renaissance Gala, perfectly aligned, embossed with silver letters, an evening to celebrate the rebirth of beauty. Isabella smiled faintly at the line. How ironic, she thought. Rebirth, the one thing her marriage had been missing. In the bedroom, Isabella Moretti stood before the mirror. The woman in the reflection, 29, tall, slender, porcelain-skinned, eyes the deep shade of chestnut, was still beautiful. Yet something vital was missing. She wore a floor-length beige gown, high neckline, long sleeves, no bare skin flawless by Leonardo's standards. A model of what he called elegance, modesty, the Devereux aesthetic. She applied a touch of nude lipstick, pinned her hair into a neat bun, and looked again. Every detail was perfect, yet there was no light in her eyes. A woman of form, without a soul. Isabella tilted her head slightly, studying her reflection. The woman staring back was not the one who had once captivated Leonardo. The woman who laughed at the gallery opening, glass of wine in hand, teasing, "If you design everything to control it, then who designs your feelings?" He had fallen silent that night, then kissed her in front of everyone. That first kiss had made her believe she would be the exception in his carefully constructed world. Now she realized she had become just another piece of that design, perfectly controlled, suffocatingly flawless. The door opened. Leonardo appeared, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit and a charcoal tie. The familiar scent of cedar wood and musk followed him in. He paused for a moment, his gaze sliding over her before looking away. "Are you ready?" he asked, his tone smooth, precise, the same cadence he used with his investors. "Almost," Isabella replied calmly. He nodded. "Good. The press will be there tonight. We need to maintain a consistent image. You know what I expect: simple, modest, nothing that draws attention." It sounded less like a husband's request and more like an instruction manual. When he left the room, the air cooled in his wake. Isabella stood motionless, eyes fixed on the door as it closed. Then slowly she turned back to the mirror. The woman before her looked perfect and lifeless. A quiet voice whispered in her mind, "This is who he wants, but not who you are." She took a deep breath, fingers brushing the buttons at her collar. It was a small motion, yet it changed everything. One by one, she unfastened them. The soft fabric slid from her shoulders, falling soundlessly to the floor like a cocoon peeling away. In the wooden wardrobe beside her hung a short black silk dress, the one she had worn during their first holiday at Lake Como. That night, Leonardo couldn't take his eyes off her. He had whispered against her ear, voice rough with awe, "If heaven exists, you're its definition." She had never worn it again, maybe because she was afraid he'd no longer see her the same way. Afraid to reveal the woman she once was, afraid that what had been passion might now be only memory. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding the dark silk in her hands, smooth as water, cool against her palms. The last rays of the sun spilled through the window, painting a thin line of gold across her bare skin. And in that light, she finally saw herself again, the real woman, not the display piece. Not the perfect wife, but the one who had once made him catch his breath with a single look. A small smile curved her lips. "You want something safe, but I was once fire." She rose, letting every trace of hesitation fall away. The black silk slid down her skin like a kiss from the past, smooth, cool, clinging to every curve. The hem brushed her thighs. The open back revealed the elegant line of her shoulder blades, faintly scented with lavender. Her hair fell in loose, natural waves, soft curls grazing her neck. She replaced her nude lipstick with a deep wine red, rich, alluring, a perfect blend of sweetness and danger. As her lips touched the color, Isabella felt as though she were kissing the version of herself she had lost. She put on her old teardrop earrings, slipped into black heels, and took a step back. In the mirror, the woman looking back was utterly transformed. No longer Mrs. Devereaux, just Isabella, radiant, alive, dangerously elegant. Her gaze met her own in the glass, and for the first time in a long time, a spark flickered to life. The door swung open. Leonardo entered again, perhaps to ask about the charity files. But when he stopped, every word died on his tongue. The golden light caught on her skin, on the delicate silver chain around her neck, on her wine-colored lips, the shade he once loved. He froze, his breath changed rhythm. Isabella lifted her eyes, voice soft, teasing. "Do you think this is too much for the gala?" Her tone was gentle, yet it carried a quiet challenge. Leonardo swallowed. "It's not your usual style." "Maybe," she smiled, "because this is who I really am." He said nothing. His eyes lingered at her throat, at the edge of the silk shifting with each breath. Silence pressed between them, thick and electric. The sound of their hearts seemed to sink slow, uneven, then faster, the unspoken rhythm of something awakening. Leonardo cleared his throat and turned away abruptly, as if afraid to lose control. "We'll be late if we don't leave now," he said, voice lower than usual. "I'm ready." She picked up her small clutch and walked past him. The blend of lavender and amber brushed the air. He didn't turn, but in the mirror his reflection watched her eyes no longer cold. Isabella stopped by the elevator, glancing at her reflection in the steel panel. In it stood a woman Florence could no longer ignore. A woman who had stopped trying to fit into someone else's design and had finally started fitting into her own. A quiet smile played at her lips as she whispered to herself, "Tonight, if anyone needs to learn how to look again, it'll be you, Leonardo Devereaux." The elevator doors closed, and the piano music swelled deep, warm, like the heartbeat of a woman slowly coming back to life. Light from the crystal chandelier scattered across the wooden floor, spilling warm gold over Isabella's bare feet. She had just sprayed a touch of perfume on her wrists, amber and orange blossom laced with sandalwood, a scent both sweet and sharp, mirroring the duality in her heart tonight. Then came the sound of footsteps. The door opened. Leonardo Devereaux stopped at the threshold, a folder still in his hand. His gaze collided with her, an unplanned impact that shifted the entire atmosphere of the room. Isabella stood beside the table, her back turned to him. The light slid down the smooth line of her spine before settling on the silk that hugged her hips. She turned. Time seemed to slow. For several seconds, Leonardo said nothing. His eyes, sharp, heavy, disoriented, moved slowly from her collarbone to her shoulder, then down to her wine-red lips, still slightly dry from lipstick. "You," he swallowed, "you're planning to wear that?" His voice was low, rough, caught somewhere between control and the loss of it. Isabella lifted her head. Her deep brown eyes met his squarely. She didn't flinch. She didn't yield. "No," she said softly, her voice calm but firm. "I'm planning to be myself." Silence. The answer was simple, yet it cracked the stillness open. Leonardo kept looking at her. For the first time in a long while, his gaze wasn't that of a man assessing, but of a man remembering what it meant to feel alive. For the first time, he couldn't find words. There was no rule book for this, no strategy for a heartbeat gone wild. He could only hear his own pulse, fast, uneven, clashing with the calm he wore like armor. She, the woman he thought he knew, suddenly felt unfamiliar, dangerous, and devastatingly real. "You've changed your style," he murmured finally, his tone low, as if trying to contain the heat behind his words. Isabella smiled faintly and turned to pick up her clutch. "No, I just stopped trying to fit into your idea of me." He frowned slightly but said nothing. As she walked past him, her scent lavender and amber brushed against him, pulling something buried deep under his ribs. It was the same scent that used to linger on his hands after the nights in Lake Como, when he couldn't stop touching her skin. Now even that faint trace was enough to make him want to hold her again. Outside, the black Bentley gleamed beneath the soft light of the street lamps. The driver opened the door. The cool evening air of Florence spilled in, carrying a breath of the Arno and distant laughter from the piazza. Leonardo walked ahead, but when Isabella followed, he instinctively turned back. She placed her hand on his arm for balance as she stepped down. Her skin, warm, smooth, made him pause for just a moment. The door closed. The car began to glide along cobblestone streets. The reflections of the golden streetlights rippled across the river, flickering through the glass like flames dancing in the dark. Isabella sat by the window, gazing outside. A soft breeze from the vent tousled a few curls that fell against her bare shoulder. Leonardo glanced at her through the reflection. The black silk dress clung perfectly sensual, not loud, daring, but elegant. It made his chest tighten in ways he hadn't felt for years. He didn't know whether he wanted to shield her from every other gaze or pull her closer, just to prove she still belonged to him. The feeling was both familiar and foreign, part desire, part fear. He clenched his hand slightly, forcing his composure. "Florence looks beautiful tonight," she said, her voice soft, still turned toward the window. "Yes," he replied, his tone low and rough. "But tonight, I'm not sure it's the city that makes it beautiful." Isabella turned her head. Their eyes met, and in that split second they both knew something had shifted, small like the first crack in ice, but irreversible. Leonardo leaned back against the seat, his gaze still on her. What he saw wasn't the cautious wife who feared disappointing him. It was a woman who had reclaimed her confidence, her pulse, her fire, the very things he'd once loved and once feared. He feared that if she ever became too free, she would leave. So he had built her a perfect cage of elegance, refinement, and safety. And in doing so, he'd killed the very spark that had made him fall in love with her. The realization hit him like a quiet ache. The car stopped in front of Palazzo Vecchio, where the gala was being held. The square shimmered under the glow of chandeliers and camera flashes. Luxury cars lined up, reporters calling names, shutters clicking like applause. Leonardo turned to her. "Are you ready?" he asked, softer this time, almost uncertain. Isabella took his hand. Her touch was gentle but firm. She tilted her head slightly, a subtle smile curving her lips. "Always. I just don't intend to be forgotten tonight." His grip tightened for a second. Reflex or fear, he didn't know. When they stepped out, flashes burst in white. Leonardo kept holding her hand, almost unconsciously declaring to the world that she was his. But only he knew his hand was trembling. Not from the chill, but from something far more dangerous. Uncertainty. Isabella lifted her chin, her wine-colored lips curving faintly. She could feel his gaze on her skin, hot, conflicted, alive. She didn't speak, but her heart whispered silently, "It's time for you to see me again, not as an image, but as the woman you once loved." They crossed the grand marble threshold where the soft hum of cello music met the scent of champagne and white roses. Lights shimmered over her black silk, over her red lips, over his eyes that both met and avoided hers. Tonight, Florence would witness the first look that cracked the ice. The gaze of a man who thought he had forgotten how to feel, and the heartbeat he could no longer control. All because of one woman who once, and perhaps still, belonged to him. Palazzo Vecchio, the ancient heart of Florence, glowed tonight under a new kind of light. Crystal chandeliers cast golden reflections across the marble floor, dissolving the grand hall into a haze of champagne tones and polished laughter. The orchestra played Strauss's Blue Danube, graceful yet commanding, while a sea of silk gowns and tailored suits swayed beneath the vaulted ceiling. Among the noblemen, financiers, and artists, Leonardo Devereux entered with Isabella, and instantly every gaze turned toward them. Not because of his name, but because of the woman beside him. Isabella shone in a way that no chandelier could replicate. Her black silk dress moved like smoke around her slender frame, bearing her back and shoulders with effortless grace. Every step she took seemed to tighten the air around her. The wine red of her lips glimmered like an invitation sweet, but edged with danger. No one saw her as Mrs. Devereux tonight. Tonight she was Isabella Moretti, the woman Florence itself would pause to admire. Leonardo felt it, and he hated admitting that he wasn't the first man to notice. He saw the lingering glances as they crossed the room, the way photographers whispered her name, the subtle nods from younger men as she passed. Something hot and cold twisted inside his chest, a sensation he had long forgotten. Jealousy. Leonardo! The warm baritone of Marco Bellini, director of an international bank, cut through the hum. The Renaissance project is extraordinary. You truly are a visionary. Leonardo smiled, shook his hand, and exchanged polite words. But his eyes, they kept searching for her. He found her near the champagne bar, laughing softly with a group of young architects. Her head tilted slightly, light sliding over her honey-toned skin. Then a man approached her, tall, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with the easy charm of someone used to winning. Adrian Caruso, CEO of Caruso. Developments, a man is known for his brilliance as for the trail of women left dazzled in his wake. Signora Devereux, he said, voice low, rich, Italian silk. May I have this waltz? Isabella hesitated. Her eyes flicked across the room toward Leonardo. He was still in conversation, or pretending to be. She smiled politely. Of course. Setting her glass down, she placed her hand in Adrian's. His palm was warm, firm, but her pulse didn't stir. She was simply dancing, simply breathing again. The orchestra began. Adrian led her to the center of the floor. They moved lightly, spinning under the chandeliers, her dress whispering against the marble. It's surprising, Adrian murmured, that a woman like you could stay hidden in Devereux's shadow for so long. Isabella smiled but didn't reply. If I were your husband, he added, I'd never let you out of my sight. The words dripped like sweet poison. Leonardo heard them. He couldn't not hear them. From across the hall, he watched Adrian's hand resting on her waist, her hair brushing his shoulder. A chill ran down Leonardo's spine. The champagne in his hand tilted, foam breaking at the rim. For a brief moment, he saw himself the man who used to make her laugh like that. And then he realized the most unbearable thing in the world wasn't betrayal. It was watching the woman you love find joy in someone else's arms. When the music ended, applause rippled across the hall. Isabella lifted her chin, smiling politely. Adrian bowed and brushed a kiss against her hand. Thank you, Signora Moretti, he said, deliberately emphasizing her maiden name. Before she could respond, a voice cut through the hum, low and edged with steel. Thank you, but my wife already has a dance partner. Leonardo. The room stilled. His tone wasn't raised, but it sliced clean through the air. Adrian smiled faintly, taking a step back, his expression half challenge, half mockery. Of course, Devereux. She's all yours. Leonardo didn't answer. He simply extended his hand. Isabella looked at him, surprise, defiance, and something unspoken flickering in her eyes. After a heartbeat, she placed her hand in his. The orchestra began again, a slower waltz. Deeper, heavier. His hand settled on her back, heat seeping through the thin silk. She lifted her face, catching the faint scent of his cedarwood cologne. They moved together as if time had folded back to nights at Lake Como, candlelit dinners, whispered promises, swallowed by years of silence. Their bodies remembered what their hearts had forgotten how to say. Isabella tried to keep rhythm, but every step threw her balance. He was still as steady as ever yet within his grip. She sensed tension, fear, the tremor of a man who'd built his life on control and was losing it, one heartbeat at a time. Leonardo leaned closer, his voice a murmur against her ear. Do you know the worst part about loving you? She met his eyes. What? That I'd forgotten what it felt like to have you in my arms, until I saw you in someone else's. Her breath caught. The music, the lights, the laughter, everything blurred into silence. Only their hearts remained. He tightened his hand at her waist, eyes lingering at her neck, on the shiver of her skin beneath his touch. She didn't pull away. She just looked back, not with challenge, but with the ache of someone who had missed him too long to admit it. The waltz ended. Applause rose again, but Leonardo didn't release her. He kept her in his arms as if letting go would dissolve everything they'd just rediscovered. Everyone's watching, she whispered. I don't care, he said, voice rough. I've spent too long watching you through the lights. Tonight, I need to remember what you feel like for real. She stilled. Possessive as it was, His words were the gentlest thing he'd said in years. They stood there amid music and chatter, surrounded by strangers, and yet, in that instant, Florence contained only them. Finally, he released her. Slowly, he lowered his gaze, a faint, unguarded smile flickering almost an apology. Isabella met his eyes. Her expression softened, but something still burned deep within. "You remembered what it feels like," she murmured. "But do you have the courage to keep it?" Leonardo didn't answer, but in his eyes the fire of Florence itself was reflected back. Florence shimmered in the dark, its light stretching across the Arno like threads of silver on black velvet. The Bentley rolled quietly over the cobblestone streets, leaving behind the glow and noise of Palazzo Vecchio. Inside the car, neither spoke. Leonardo sat angled toward the window, one hand on his knee, the tendons tightening with each slow breath. Across from him, Isabella stared out at the city. Her dark hair had come loose, curls falling against her bare shoulders, glistening faintly with a mix of sweat and wine. The air between them was thick, heavy, electric, the kind of silence that trembles before it breaks. Both knew that a single word could set everything ablaze. When the car stopped in front of the penthouse, Leonardo stepped out first, opening the door for her. She didn't look at him as she passed. The sharp echo of her heels on the marble floor cut through the night. The door closed behind them with a dull click. The city outside faded into stillness, only the ticking clock and their breathing filled the elegant, suffocating space. Isabella reached up, unclasping her earrings, then the necklace, one by one. Each piece fell onto the wooden table with a soft metallic chime. Then she turned. Her voice was calm, too calm, every word sharp enough to slice through the air. "You don't get to be jealous. Not when you're the one who forgot I existed." Leonardo lifted his head. His eyes, gray with a trace of gold, were storm dark. "I never forgot. Didn't you?" She gave a small, bitter laugh. "You forgot to touch me. You forgot to ask how my day was. You forgot that I wasn't part of your decor, that I was supposed to be part of you." She took a step closer, her voice trembling but fierce. "You remember every blueprint, every profit margin, every contract except one thing, that you let our marriage die without even noticing." Leonardo was silent for several seconds. Then his voice came rough and low. "I thought having you was enough." Isabella shook her head slowly. Her breath shivered, but her gaze stayed unflinching. "No, Leonardo. Having me and not seeing me, that's the same as losing me. You possess, but you don't love. You hold on, but you never touch." He stepped forward slowly, deliberately measuring each inch of distance. She didn't move. She just looked at him, lips still tinted wine red, daring him to either walk away or finally feel. Leonardo stopped just before her. Only inches separated them. The light above traced a golden line along her bare skin, fragile, luminous, trembling. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice husky, cracking under its own restraint. "I want you to see me," she said softly, her tone breaking the air like glass. "Not as something you already own. As the woman who once made you alive." His hands clenched. Anger, longing, fear all collided within him. "You think I don't see you? Every night you're right here and I'm terrified that if I touch you, I'll destroy what's left." "You already did," she whispered, eyes wet but steady, "with your silence." That sentence landed like a final blade. No logic, no control could save what was breaking open between them. The air snapped humid, raw, trembling with heat. Leonardo moved first. In 2 strides, he pulled her toward him. There was a soft thud, the sound of bodies colliding against the edge of the table, of breath catching mid-motion. She tried to speak, but his mouth was already on hers. The kiss was wild, desperate, 3 years of coldness, burned to ash in one sudden blaze. It wasn't tender. It wasn't neat. It was instinct, 2 souls colliding after years of pretending not to need each other. Isabella's hands pressed against his chest, but she didn't push him away. She could feel his heart pounding, frantic, trembling, as if he was afraid of losing her all over again. He broke the kiss just enough to gasp. "I'd forgotten what this felt like for 3 damn years." "Don't promise me anything," she whispered, her tears slipping onto his lips. Just don't go silent again. He answered with another kiss, deeper, rougher, part apology, part punishment. His hands found her back, sliding beneath the thin silk. She shivered not from fear, but from recognition. She had thought she'd forgotten what it felt like to be loved. But as his touch traced old memories, the ache inside her cracked open, and the rain finally came after a long, dry season. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Summer rain began to fall, tapping against the glass, a syncopated rhythm to their breaths. Leonardo pressed his forehead against hers, voice raw and broken. "I'm sorry, Bella." She closed her eyes, her fingers brushing the edge of his collar. "Don't say my name like regret," she breathed. "Say it like you used to." He answered her with another kiss, slower this time, but deeper until words no longer mattered. Pain and desire melted into something achingly human, fragile, fierce, alive. Soul Stories fam, if you're watching on another channel, come home to us at Soul Stories, where tens of thousands of listeners and sharers come together. The rain struck harder, the sound echoing through the glass walls as they lost themselves in each other. Her silk dress slipped from her shoulders, pooling silently on the marble floor. His hands roamed her skin, rediscovering every line, every curve, as if mapping the way home after years of wandering. Isabella tilted her head back, her breath breaking into the sound of rain, unsteady, trembling, real. No more words, only the rhythm of two people learning how to love again. In darkness, in breath, in the remnants of what was once broken. As the storm outside subsided, the room fell into a warm, dim glow. Isabella lay still, her head resting on his shoulder. Raindrops glittered on the window like shards of glass. Leonardo stroked her hair gently, his hand still trembling. Neither spoke, but both understood. Tonight wasn't a weakness, it was a confession. They had found each other again in chaos, in tears, in the raw pulse of something real. Nothing was perfect, but at least, at last, they were true. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, casting a soft gold glow across the marble floor. From afar, the church bells of Florence rang softly, blending with the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Isabella stirred, her lashes fluttering as she opened her eyes. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was until she felt the warmth beside her. Leonardo was still there. He lay on his side, one arm draped over her waist, his breathing steady, his face calm in a way she hadn't seen for years. The sunlight traced his jawline, sharp and familiar, and her heart trembled. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't wake up to silence. She watched him quietly, the memories of last night still vivid, the anger, the tears, the kiss, the surrender of two hearts that had been holding back for far too long. A part of her feared that when she woke, he would be gone again, like all those other mornings. But when Leonardo opened his eyes, he looked at her first and smiled, not the polite, distant smile she had come to know, but a real one, tired and warm. "Good morning, Bella," he murmured, his voice low and husky with sleep. Isabella blinked. "I thought you'd already left." He reached for his phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up with reminders. Meeting with Tokyo, 8 a.m. Board call in 15 minutes. He stared at them for a moment, then pressed the button and placed the phone face down. There's no meeting more important than this morning. Isabella looked at him, almost laughing. Leonardo Devereaux, the man who once made the world spin around his schedule, was lying beside her, in a room filled with sunlight, with his phone off and his attention entirely on her. She smiled faintly. Someone just broke his own rule. "Maybe," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, "but some rules deserve to be broken, especially the ones that made me forget what really matters." Later, the kitchen was bathed in soft morning light. No servants, no perfect breakfast, spread just 2 espresso cups, a few slices of toast, and the jar of orange marmalade she had made a month ago, the one he had never touched. Leonardo fumbled awkwardly with the knife, and it clinked against the plate. Isabella chuckled. "You're really breaking every rule today." "I've never done this before," he admitted, slightly embarrassed. "I guess I forgot how to live. Normally." She smiled. "That's all right. We can learn again." They ate slowly, unhurriedly. Every word, every shared glance was tentative, but sincere enough to fill the air with something fragile and alive. The kitchen felt warmer than the sunlight streaming through the window. After breakfast, Leonardo stood by the glass wall, gazing out at the calm Arno River. Florence was peaceful, so different from the world of meetings and numbers he had built around himself. Isabella joined him, standing silently beside him. For a while, neither spoke. Then his voice came, quiet and steady. I forgot that love isn't about control, it's about listening. She turned to him, her hand brushing his. I don't need you to be perfect, Leonardo, she said softly. I just need you to be real. He didn't reply, but his fingers tightened gently around hers, a gesture without pretense, only truth. The sunlight fell across her hair, making the soft curls glimmer like golden threads. Leonardo's voice broke the quiet again. I don't know what will happen next, he said, but I want to try. Not because I'm afraid of losing you, but because I want to truly see you every day. Isabella smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. Then start by learning how to make coffee without spilling it. He laughed, the sound low and genuine, echoing softly through the bright kitchen. So that's our deal. No contracts, no rules, just two people learning how to be together again. She tilted her head, her eyes warm. An imperfect beginning, but a real one. That morning, for the first time in years, the penthouse no longer felt like a monument to silence. It was alive with laughter, the clink of coffee cups, and the quiet rhythm of breath shared between two people rediscovering how to live and how to love. Outside, the church bells of Florence rang again, the sound of morning and the sound of a promise. Sometimes love doesn't need to burn bright. It only needs to stay warm long enough for two hearts to find their way home after the storm. The morning sun poured into Florence, bathing the city in a soft glow of gold. In the kitchen filled with the scent of coffee, Isabella was slicing thin rounds of orange into a glass of water. Leonardo sat at the table, his white shirt slightly wrinkled, his hair still mussed from the wind on the balcony. It looked like an ordinary scene, but for them, it was something they had never had before. They had just lived their first night together in 3 years, not as a drunken mistake, but as a quiet rebirth. Leonardo was saying something about the coffee when Isabella laughed, and the sound of it still hung in the air when knock, knock, knock. A sharp rap at the door cut through the moment. He frowned. Isabella looked at him, a flicker of worry in her eyes. The door opened. Matteo Bianchi, the largest shareholder of Devereaux Group, a man with a gray face and eyes always calculating, stepped in without waiting for an invitation. I'm sorry to interrupt, Leonardo, he said quickly, his voice urgent. The Milan project just collapsed. City Hall has revoked the permit, and the Japanese investors have pulled out. The board wants to see you immediately. The warmth in the room cooled at once. Leonardo stood up, and Isabella watched as the man before her shifted. The one she had held last night was gone, replaced by the CEO Devereaux, the man who could bend an empire with a few words. How soon? He asked. 30 minutes. Matteo's glance flicked toward Isabella, a faint trace of judgment in his eyes, then back to Leonardo. We'll wait for you at headquarters. This can't be delayed. The door shut behind him. For a few seconds, only the sound of the clock and the wind through the curtains remained. Leonardo stood still. Isabella moved closer, touching his wrist lightly. You should go. He looked at her, his gaze caught between worry and something he couldn't afford to lose. I don't want to leave you. You're not leaving me. You're stepping away for a moment. Her voice was soft but firm. Go, Leonardo. But when it's over, come back. Don't let that world swallow you again. He held her hand, nodded. I promise. In Milan, the Devereaux Group headquarters rose like steel against a cold gray sky. The boardroom on the 37th floor was filled to capacity. White light fell hard on the faces of men in dark suits, their expressions drawn tight. On the giant screen, a flood of red numbers glared back at them. Cost overruns at 30%. The press is attacking the project. The shareholders demand that you take responsibility, Matteo said, his voice cold as steel. Leonardo stayed silent. He sat there listening to every accusation, every number falling like stones. But in his mind, there were no charts, only the image of Isabella's eyes lit by morning sun when she said, I just need you to be real. another voice cut in. You've been too busy building a reputation, Devereaux. But reputation can't save the heart of an empty empire. The words from one of the elder board members landed like a blade across the room. Leonardo lifted his head. Empty? Yes. I thought this empire was proof of my worth. But in truth, I've only been trying to fill the loss of the one thing that made me want to live, not to conquer. The room went silent. Matteo's brow creased. What are you saying, Leonardo? I'm saying that power is a religion I've been worshiping, and I've had everything except the one thing worth keeping. He stood, loosening his tie, unbuttoning his collar. If you want to punish me, punish me. But don't expect me to trade what's left of myself to save a number. Without another glance, he walked out, leaving stunned faces behind. The elevator doors closed, reflecting back a man who, for the first time, looked like himself. By late afternoon, Florence was bathed in a red-orange sunset. Light rain tapped against the penthouse windows. Leonardo stepped inside. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of a pencil over paper. He stopped at the doorway. Isabella was sitting by the window, a light shawl draped around her shoulders, her hair loosely tied, a hint of bare skin catching the last light of the day. Before her lay an open sketchbook filled with interior designs, soft, free, alive. The sunset slanted across her neck, dissolving everything else into a halo of color. The sight made him catch his breath. He had seen thousands of designs, millions of lines, but none of them had ever been as beautiful as this. A woman alive in her quiet moment, drawing her way back to herself. She heard his footsteps and turned. You came back. I promised, Leonardo said, his voice low, tired but lighter. He came closer, standing behind her, glancing at the sketchbook. You're drawing again? Yes. I need to remember who I used to be. Leonardo bent slightly, his finger brushing the edge of the page. It's beautiful. Free. No lines forced into place. I envy the way you see the world. She smiled faintly, tilting her head so the light touched her deep brown eyes. And I just hope you don't let that world swallow you again. He looked at her long, quietly. Then he said softly, Today I realize the empire I built is hollow enough to be frightening. If I lost it all, I could start over. But if I lost you, I couldn't. Isabella didn't speak. She set her pencil down, turned to face him. The space between them was now only a breath. Then don't let words be just words, Leonardo, she whispered. He bent his head and pressed a kiss to her forehead, a kiss that didn't demand, but thanked and repented. Outside, the sunset painted the city in warm orange hues. Inside the quiet room, they sat together without speaking, without needing proof. Amid a world of chaos, they had found a single moment of real peace. And in that silence, Leonardo understood. He had stepped out of his empty empire to return to where he was meant to be beside her. The afternoon light of Florence draped the room in a soft veil of gold. Sunlight spilled gently over the wooden table, glinting through the glass of orange juice in Isabella's hand. The penthouse was quiet, filled only with the breeze rustling through the olive trees outside and the faint scent of lavender drifting from the diffuser. She sat curled up on the couch, barefoot, her dark hair loosely tied, a thin shirt draped over her shoulders, simple, effortless, and beautifully composed in that quiet way only she possessed. On the table lay her open laptop, its screen glowing with an email from Adrian Caruso, the man who had once danced with her at the gala, and who now wanted her as part of his new empire. Isabella, I'd like to offer you the position of creative director for the Delice Hotel project in Paris. Studio, team, expenses, everything will be taken care of. We can begin the moment you say yes. She read it twice, then leaned back in her seat. Paris, the city she once dreamed of, where she could live as herself again, create freely, no longer Mrs. Devereaux. A part of her longed to say yes, to see if the world still had a place for Isabella Moretti, the woman she was before she became a name beside his. But her gaze drifted toward the corner of the room, where a large sketch lay unfinished, the interior design concept she and Leonardo had begun together for their first joint project. She had promised herself that if he truly changed, she wouldn't leave before she saw it through. The soft ring of her phone broke the stillness. Adrian Caruso. Isabella drew a slow breath before answering. Hello, Adrian. Isabella, his voice was smooth, persuasive. I hope you've thought about it. Paris needs you, and frankly, so do I. She smiled faintly, her voice calm, gentle, but steady. Paris is beautiful, Adrian, but I think I already have a life here that needs finishing first. There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. Then came his quiet chuckle. I understand, but if you ever change your mind— I won't, she interrupted softly but with certainty, because I've already chosen to stay not for anyone else, but for myself. She ended the call and set the phone down, exhaling slowly. What she didn't know was that Leonardo had heard everything from his office down the hall. He stood in the doorway, the light falling across his face, half shadow, half sun. After a long pause, he walked toward her. Isabella was still seated, idly turning her glass in her hands. When he came closer, she lifted her gaze to meet his. You turned down Paris? He asked, his voice low, touched with both surprise and something softer, almost gratitude. I did, she said, her tone even. I think before I build dreams somewhere else, I need to finish the life I started here. He didn't speak right away. Something flickered in his eyes, not pride, not relief, but a mix of humility and guilt, the kind that comes with recognition. Thank you, he said finally, for not walking away. She set her glass down, her eyes warm but unyielding. I only stay if you truly want me here, Leonardo, not as decoration in a beautiful empire. His gaze broke, then found hers again, a storm, and a calm at once. He stepped closer, resting his fingertips against the edge of the table. His voice was husky when he spoke. I want you here, Isabella. Not to fill a void. I need you in my life, not my image. No roles, no expectations. Just you. She didn't answer, but her lips curved not in irony, but in forgiveness. He sat beside her. The sunlight caught in her hair, making the dark strands shimmer like threads of gold. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and lavender, a quiet warmth. You know why I think I didn't leave, she said softly. He glanced at her. Why? Because for the first time in 3 years, you're real. Leonardo exhaled a sound that was half laugh, half sigh. The truth is, I was always afraid I wasn't enough for you. Control was all I knew, it's how I survived. But with you, I'm learning that love isn't control. It's the courage to be seen when you're not perfect. Isabella didn't reply. She reached out and placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. And that's all I ever wanted. She leaned forward, her forehead touching his. For a moment, Florence outside went still. There was only their breath, slow, warm, steady. Their eyes met, tender, earnest, and glistening like the wind that swept across Florence in early summer. Leonardo's hand rose to her cheek, his fingers tracing the softness of her skin. She didn't move away. I used to fear losing you, he whispered, but now I fear something worse, making you disappear again because of me. She smiled gently, her voice both soft and strong. I'm the kind of woman who won't disappear anymore, Leonardo. Not for you, not for anyone. Her words hit him like sunlight after rain. He smiled back quietly, sincerely. I don't want you to disappear. I just want to be lucky enough to see you every day. She laughed under her breath, the fading light dancing in her eyes like honey. They sat there for a long while, not touching, not speaking, wrapped in that fragile space where silence no longer divided, but connected. Outside, Florence pulsed with life, the hum of voices from the streets below, the distant toll of church bells rolling through the evening air. Inside the penthouse, the world had shrunk to just the two of them, two souls who had once lost each other and now finally found their way home. And in that golden hour, Leonardo understood one simple truth. Some women aren't meant to disappear. They exist to teach us how to love again one day, one breath at a time. Morning sunlight filled Florence with a soft golden glow. The light filtered through the curtains, falling across the marble counter where 2 cups of espresso still steamed. The scent of coffee drifted through the kitchen, rich, warm, and deep, like a memory. Isabella tied a cream silk apron around her waist, holding a small silver spoon in one hand. Leonardo stood beside her, sleeves rolled up, his white shirt creased slightly, looking both out of place and dangerously endearing. You've run an entire empire, And yet you don't know how to make coffee, she teased, tilting her head. I can sign €100 million deal, he said with a hint of wry amusement. But this machine doesn't seem interested in negotiations. She laughed softly, the sound like a note of music floating through the warm morning air. Then let me teach you. But promise me one thing, no giving orders to the machine, all right? I'll try. But if it breaks, I'm blaming the instructor. Their laughter mingled with the hiss of boiling water and the gentle clink of metal against glass, a symphony of ordinary sounds that somehow felt extraordinary, filling the house with a life it hadn't known for years. Isabella moved closer, her hand gently resting over his as he tilted the kettle. Easy, she murmured. Coffee has to be treated like something alive. If you rush it, it turns bitter. Her voice was soft, her breath brushing his neck. Leonardo froze for a second, her scent lavender, honey, and something only she had blended with the warmth of the coffee, and his pulse stumbled. He turned slightly, glancing back at her over his shoulder. The distance between them was barely a breath. I thought coffee was just about formulas, he said quietly. It isn't, she whispered with a faint smile. It's about patience. Like love. You can know all the rules, but without patience, you'll never taste the real thing. The words were light, but they struck a deep chord. He set the kettle down and turned to face her. The morning light touched her face, her skin glowing, her brown eyes glimmering with flecks of gold. I'm still learning how to love, he said, his voice low, raw, and real. Isabella smiled gently. Then it's a good thing I'm still here to teach you. The coffee was ready. They sat together at the small marble table, steam curling lazily between them. Leonardo took a sip and winced slightly. Bitter, he muttered. Because you poured too fast, she teased. Next time, let me hold your hand a little longer. He laughed under his breath. Sounds like the most interesting lesson I've ever taken. She rested her chin on her hand, eyes bright. Careful, Leonardo. Coffee isn't the only thing I'm teaching you. The space between them stilled, not heavy, not awkward, just full. The smell of coffee mingled with sunlight and the warmth of breath, turning the simple morning into something sacred. Leonardo looked at her, his expression softening in a way she had never seen before. You know, he said quietly, I used to think love was control, keeping everything within reach. But love is letting go. Isabella tilted her head, her smile tender. Letting go to touch, not holding on to protect from loss. He nodded slowly, and in that moment, they understood each other perfectly without needing another word. She reached across the table, brushing away a faint streak of coffee from his lower lip. Her fingertip lingered on his skin, a brief, electric touch. Leonardo caught her hand, not hard, just enough to keep it there. Isabella, he whispered, his voice hoarse, as if her name itself was an exhale. She met his gaze. She didn't pull back. The next second, his lips found hers. The kiss wasn't rushed or fierce, it was quiet, slow, and filled with everything unspoken. Two people who had lost their way, finding each other again between the warmth of their breath and the scent of coffee. The bitterness melted into sweetness. When they finally broke apart, she smiled against his lips. You're improving. In coffee or in love? Both. They sat together for a long time. The light of Florence slowly spread across the room. On the table, the coffee grew cold, but its fragrance lingered. Leonardo reached for her hand again. I think, he said softly, maybe everything begins again, not with promises, but with a cup of coffee. As long as you don't pour too fast, she teased, her tone playful and warm. He chuckled, the sound low and content. I'll learn one day, one drop at a time. Outside, the church bells rang through the late morning. Inside the penthouse, the air still carried the scent of coffee, a quiet reminder that sometimes love doesn't need grand gestures. It only needs to slow down, stay true to itself, and be patient enough to bloom into its own gentle fragrance. Morning broke over Florence in a gentle blaze of light. The penthouse was still, save for the faint hum of traffic far below. On the table, a black suitcase lay open, a few suits neatly folded beside it. Next to them, a single plane ticket rested Florence. Dubai is sharp printed letters slicing through the warmth that had only recently returned to the apartment. Isabella stood by the kitchen doorway, a half-finished cup of coffee in her hand. The steam rose between her and the suitcase, blurring her gaze. There was no accusation in her eyes, only understanding laced with quiet fear. Leonardo emerged from the bedroom, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his phone gripped tightly in his hand. "Matteo just called," he said, his voice low and rough. "The board needs me in Dubai. The Middle Eastern investments are tanking. If I don't show up, they'll freeze the project." He set the phone down and stared at the ticket, then at her. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. "You can't not go, can you?" Isabella asked softly. "I wish I could," he said, eyes still fixed on the ticket. "But if I don't, hundreds of jobs could vanish. Everything I've built." He stopped mid-sentence. "And everyone will think I've lost my edge." Isabella walked toward him, setting her cup down beside his phone. "They can think whatever they want, Leonardo. But you're not weak because you love someone. You're only weak if you lose yourself again." Her words sank into him like the echo of truth he'd spent years avoiding. He thought of the nights buried in spreadsheets, of victories that left him empty, of applause that never warmed him, and now standing before the woman who could fill an entire room with peace just by being in it, he finally understood what he was truly afraid of losing. She helped him fasten the buttons of his shirt. The distance between them vanished. He could feel her breath against his collar, smell the lavender in her hair. "I don't need you home every day," she said, her voice soft but certain. "I just need you to choose to come back." Leonardo looked down at her. The morning light filtered through the curtains, caught in her brown eyes, and for a moment, the world shrank to a single promise. "I'll come back," he said, his voice husky, steady. "Always." She smiled faintly. She didn't ask for more. She knew this time he meant it. Florence Airport buzzed with noise and motion, the mechanical rhythm of departure. Leonardo walked through it all, his footsteps echoing between announcements, white light, and polished floors. But in his mind there was only her voice. "I just need you to choose to come back." From the plane window, he watched the city fade the rooftops, the Arno glinting gold in the sun, the skyline that now felt like home, not because of its beauty, but because of her. For the first time in years, he felt no thrill at the thought of business ahead. Only a hollow ache of missing, and a fear that he might come back too late. Dubai night. The Devereux Middle East headquarters glowed against the desert sky, sharp and cold. Inside the glass boardroom, the clock struck 10 p.m. The air was thick with tension. Graphs of plunging numbers flashed red across the screen. Matteo's voice cut through the silence. "If we don't sell our stake, we'll lose liquidity within 2 quarters. Another director interjected, impatient. "We should sell immediately. Protect the cash flow. Devereux can rebuild later." All eyes turned to Leonardo. He sat motionless, fingers laced, gaze distant. Once he would have already made a decision. Once logic would have spoken louder than everything. But now all he saw behind those numbers was Isabella by the window in Florence, her shoulder lit by sunset, her words echoing, "You only become weak when you lose yourself." "Mr. Devereux," someone pressed, "your decision?" "Sell or hold." Leonardo drew a slow breath. The room went silent. The ticking of the clock filled the air. He lifted his head, and when he spoke, his voice was calm but resolute. "No." Matteo frowned. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, we're not selling." A wave of shock rippled through the room. Chairs scraped, voices rose. Leonardo didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his tone firm, each word measured. "We've spent too long chasing numbers. This company wasn't built to be afraid of loss. I won't sell the soul of Devereux just to keep a temporary throne." One of the board members snapped, "You're risking everything for sentiment?" Leonardo smiled faintly, a weary kind of smile. "Maybe, but for the first time, I know that sentiment is worth more than any number you could show me." He paused, his gaze softening, as if he were speaking not to them, but to someone half a world away. "I used to think holding an empire meant holding everything. But all I ever held were stones cold, lifeless. Now I finally have something worth keeping." He inhaled deeply, his next words barely more than a whisper. "Her." After the meeting, Leonardo stepped onto the rooftop terrace. The desert wind blew hot and dry, carrying the faint scent of sand and smoke. Below, the city stretched out in glittering lines, distant, dazzling, indifferent. He pulled out his phone. A single message from Isabella waited. Waiting. He leaned back against the railing, eyes closed. In the reflection of the glass wall behind him, he no longer saw the impenetrable CEO, only a man, stripped of armor, finally remembering how to be real. He typed his reply slowly, each word deliberate. I'm on my way home. In Florence, night had fallen. Rain drizzled softly against the windows. Isabella sat by the window, watching the city lights shimmer through the mist. The phone buzzed on the table beside her. She picked it up, and when she saw the message, her lips curved into a small, quiet smile. I'm on my way home. She set the phone against her heart, feeling the warmth rise within her. Outside, the streets of Florence glowed under the rain, and inside her, something long dormant stirred again. Not relief, not victory, just faith, quiet, steady, and real. 2 months passed. Florence had slipped into early autumn. The trees along the Arno River turned the color of honey gold, and the sunlight, once harsh, had softened into something clear and gentle. Devereux Group, once on the brink of collapse, had recovered. The Milan project had been successfully restructured, investors returned, and the press celebrated the powerful comeback of Leonardo Devereux. But to him, fame was no longer the greatest victory. The true victory was waking up each morning to see Isabella sitting by the balcony, sipping her coffee, sunlight dancing through her hair. It was the quiet walks they shared across the Ponte Vecchio at night, saying nothing, just holding hands. After years spent buried in blueprints, numbers, and endless meetings, Leonardo finally understood. Some things can't be signed with a pen, they can only be kept with the heart. That day, Florence welcomed an intimate yet elegant event. Visible, Presence, an exhibition curated by Isabella Moretti. It was an artistic space about light and emotion, where every wall, every mirror, and every interior detail was arranged so that visitors could see not the artwork, but themselves. On the central wall, she had written, "Sometimes the most beautiful thing isn't in the light itself, but in the moment we dare to let the light touch us." The air was filled with the scent of fresh wood and faint paint, while a cello played softly in the background. Guests murmured in awe at each piece. Sunlit rooms, white walls that reflected those standing before them, modern, warm, and entirely Isabella. Yet amid the praise, the flashes of cameras and the golden lights, she still felt a small emptiness, a space where a familiar gaze hadn't yet appeared. Then, as she was speaking with an art critic, the doors at the end of the hall opened. Leonardo Devereux walked in, no announcement, no spotlight, just the sound of his footsteps on the wooden floor, and the entire room seemed to slow. He wore a white shirt and an unbuttoned black vest. Tall, composed, his eyes calm yet burning bright. But when he saw her, that gaze softened. Warm, real. Isabella turned. Their eyes met across the crowd, across the music, across 1,000 reflections of light. The world seemed to shrink, leaving only the two of them. Leonardo walked forward, slow and steady, as if every step was an unspoken apology. When he finally stopped before her, a faint, sincere smile crossed his lips. "You don't just exist," he said, voice low and rough, just loud enough for her to hear through the hum of the room. "You are the light." The words made Isabella's eyes glimmer. In the gallery created to honor light, he was the one who saw her most clearly. Her reply was soft but unwavering. "Light only exists when someone is brave enough to open their eyes to it." He smiled, taking one step closer, closing the distance between them. There were no more cameras, no more boards, no more curious eyes that could intrude on the moment. From his pocket, he drew out a small silver box that caught the light, and there, in the exhibition called Visible, he knelt down. The entire hall went silent. Only the cello played a tender note, like a breath. "The first time I married you," Leonardo said, eyes never leaving hers, "it was because I was afraid to lose you. This time I want to marry you, because I want to live with you." Time stilled. Isabella brought her hand to her lips, tears shining in her eyes. There was no surprise, only a deep, quiet emotion, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along, through her journey of rediscovering herself. She bent down, touching his cheek gently, her voice trembling but soft. I never really left, Leonardo. I was only waiting for the day you'd truly see me. He rose to his feet. They embraced, surrounded by applause, beneath golden reflections dancing on the glass ceiling, as the whole room glowed like dawn. Isabella rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "This time, if you lose your way, I'll pull you back." "I believe you," he murmured, "because you are home." That night Florence shimmered as if the city itself was smiling. People spoke of the exhibition, of the woman who turned light into language, and of the man who had once stood atop the world, only to find peace standing beside her. After the celebration, they walked together across the Ponte Vecchio. The golden lights rippled on the river below, and the night breeze carried the scent of citrus and wood. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Only hand in hand and a promise unspoken. True love doesn't begin with perfection. It begins in the moment two people choose each other again and forever. 6 months later. Florence was in autumn, its sky glazed in shades of golden honey. Sunlight fell upon the red rooftops and balconies, overflowing with lavender. From the penthouse above the city, everything seemed to slow down, as if the whole world had paused to listen to the laughter echoing from the small kitchen upstairs. "Leonardo!" Isabella's voice rang out, a mix of amusement and mock scolding. "What did you just do?" Leonardo turned around, holding in his hand a half-burnt slice of toast, light smoke curling through the kitchen. He shrugged, trying to hide his embarrassment. "I only looked away for 30 seconds. Your 30 seconds are enough to turn breakfast into abstract art." She laughed, stepping closer, gently taking the tongs from his hand. The smell of burnt bread mixed with hot coffee creates a strange blend, strong, familiar, and unmistakably their own. Standing behind him, Isabella wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head on his back. "Thank goodness you're a terrible cook. That way I still have a reason to stay." Leonardo chuckled, placing his hand over hers. The warmth of her touch seeped through the thin cotton of his shirt, sinking into his skin, making the rest of the world fade away. He tilted his head, pressing a slow, grateful kiss to her neck. "And I," he murmured, his voice low and soft as the breath of late afternoon, "remember why I came back every time I see you smile." She squeezed his hand gently, her lips curving faintly. "Then keep burning the toast, will you? I like seeing you flustered." "You like seeing me fail?" "No, I like seeing you real." Leonardo turned around. Their eyes met through a thin veil of smoke. The last light of day streamed through the window, painting her face in a golden hue as if she were glowing from within. He leaned in, their lips touching lightly like a quiet confession. No more drama, no more struggle, just two people, peaceful enough to love, wise enough to know that love doesn't need to be perfect, only chosen, every single day. Evening slowly descended. The kitchen was calm. The smell of burnt toast had faded, replaced by the soft sweetness of vanilla from the cake Isabella had just baked. They carried 2 glasses of red wine onto the balcony, where the sunset poured molten gold over Florence. From up there, the city looked like a painting, red rooftops, tiny chimneys puffing smoke, the distant sound of church bells blending with birds swooping over the Arno. Isabella sat on a wooden chair, pulling her legs up, holding her glass. Leonardo sat beside her, draping a light scarf over her shoulders. Neither of them spoke. Only the dimming sunlight brushed their skin, and their steady breaths fell into the same rhythm. "You know," he said softly, his voice floating in the golden air, "not everyone gets the chance to love the one they once lost." She turned to him, her gaze soft as autumn water. He looked at her, then continued, "I'm lucky, because you gave me that chance." Isabella smiled gently. "I didn't give it. You found it yourself. I just stood still long enough for you to see me." Leonardo was silent for a moment, then lifted his glass. "Then to you, the one who reminded me how to see, how to feel, and how to love." She raised hers too. "And to you, the man who finally learned that love isn't about keeping, but about coexisting." Their glasses clinked softly. The sound rang delicate and clear, like the final note of a symphony. The sun sank behind the red rooftops. The light shimmered on their wine glasses and across their skin crimson warmth, melting into breath, tender and unspoken like a promise. Isabella rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart beneath his shirt. "Do you know what I love most about Florence?" she asked. "Tell me." "The afternoons. Because every day the sun falls as if for the first time, just like the way you look at me." Leonardo smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "I look at you as if I'm afraid of losing you again. But this time," she whispered, eyes half closed, "you won't." He bent down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "No, because this time, I've learned how to stay." The twilight deepened, the red fading into violet. The city began to glow. Beneath their balcony, Florence sparkled like a galaxy, and on that small terrace, two people sat side by side, wrapped in the sweet silence of those who had weathered the storm and chosen to remain. Inside, the burnt toast still sat in the oven tray, a clumsy relic, a reminder that happiness doesn't need perfection. It only needs laughter, a hand to hold, and a sunset to share. Isabella turned to him, her face bathed in the last trace of light. "You know, Florence has never looked this beautiful." "It's not the city, Bella," he replied, voice husky, eyes glimmering with the sunset's fire. "It's because, for the first time, I'm seeing it through your eyes." She laughed softly, tapping her glass against his one more time. Then they kissed amidst the twilight, the echoing church bells and the scent of lavender drifting through the breeze. A kiss neither rushed nor planned, only the pure joy of being alive, being loved, and being present. Florence slowly sank into the night. On the high balcony, two souls who had once lost each other now sat close, shoulder to shoulder, their glasses touching one last time in the fading light. Because sometimes love doesn't need to be reborn in fire, only in the quiet glow of those who dare to stay. And they stayed. Amidst the sunset, amidst the city of love, amidst themselves. Thank you for being part of Soul Stories. If you're listening on another channel, come back to the official home so you can continue our love journeys together with the Soul Stories family.